Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on a Friday morning, evening, depending on where you are. This is the live fireside chat with the father-daughter duo of David and Rachael McConney. The three of us have been talking about the multi-generational perspective on the future of work for the last 3-4 months. We started this journey in September, and it was actually Rachael and David's idea. This was a real-time experience for them in the job search process, and that's how this whole thing emerged. And then when the three of us started talking about it, it really morphed from the idea of having it as a podcast to this video series, conversation series, a 3-part series that's available on the that we launched via YouTube. And then we're always intended to also wrap it up with a live conversation as well. And that's what we're doing today. So if you haven't watched our previous conversations, please head over to the YouTube North Star's YouTube channel, and there's a playlist for the future of work, a multi-generational perspective. The premise that we really started with was that our lives are changed. I mean, COVID, non-COVID, lives have changed. We are living longer. The human race is living longer. So obviously, and healthier as well. So obviously, we tend to work longer. And then when you look at specifically in the knowledge workspace and other industries as well, so not just IT or software development in general, across industries, multi-generational teams are becoming the norm. And what does that mean? And that's what we explored in the first 3 parts of this conversation that we had. We started with looking at what are the realities and what are the expectations from the different generations in their job search process. What does success look like for them? And then we looked at what do organizations have to do to help get everyone set up for success in that environment? What are the success factors around that? So those are some of the things that we've looked at. And each of us has received feedback offline and in other conversations. And we thought that this would be a good place to kind of wrap it up. And we invite your participation as well, both AK and Neeraj. So feel free to use the chat box or to chime in as needed. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to David and Rachael.
Meenu, thank you. Maybe I'll just first of all start by sort of acknowledging the participation of both of you. This was an idea that, as you said, Rachael and I came up with, but really Rachael came up with, because we were both at that point in time going through the job search process and experiencing different things based on our, I suppose, our respective places from a generational point of view. And we were sharing ideas, and I was starting out in the process being a little bit of a teacher to Rachael in terms of these are some of the things that you should think about. And actually, as the process morphed, I also became the student. And it was really fun to sort of participate and get her perspective on some of what either she was seeing that I could learn from, or that I was experiencing that she could help me think through. So it's been a great experience in that regard. And I suppose because of that, it really sort of shone a light on the whole notion of teams and the importance of teams, and the benefit of having teams that come at things from a different perspective. So, we targeted the generational conversation, but there are lots of other aspects that can be targeted, whether it's ethnic or, some sort of cultural aspects and so on. So there are all of those. And how does that go into to building effective teams? So that was kind of the genesis of it, and it's been a fun process. But let me stop there and have Rachel sort of comment, and then maybe we can talk about some of the individual feedback, elements of feedback that we've had.
Yeah, no, it's a good introduction. And I think that when we sort of started talking about this conversation, we were coming at it from both being in a place where we felt like we were at an inherent disadvantage, me because I had very little experience going into the workforce, and my dad because he was like, well, people think that I'm coming to an end, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. And so there were a lot of frustrations that came out because we were both feeling that way. And that's really what sparked the discussion in the first place. But I think that, you know, I said that we were each at an inherent disadvantage because of our respective ages, but I really do think that companies who operate this way, companies who aren't looking at people from both ends of the spectrum and aren't looking at you know, different cultures and aren't open to a variety of opinions, they're also putting themselves at an inherent disadvantage, because it's really in those different opinions and in those different perspectives where you gain a lot of valuable knowledge and where you become able to respond better to the things that are going on in the world. You aren't able to do that by leveraging a single opinion, a single mindset, a single age group. And so that's really the huge takeaway for me from this whole thing. And the thing that the message that I want to share the most.
Yeah, that.
I don't know if any particular thoughts on that or experiences.
Yeah, that's such an important point. We talked about that, and that was, you know, it was really pretty interesting to think about it in the context of the team, right? Because so much now is geared towards a certain mindset. Whether that mindset is technologically driven, and so if you're at a certain age, you have to be more tech savvy than someone at a different age, or whatever those notions are. And we had some really cool conversations about continuous learning and how people embrace that, and how people combine that concept of continuous learning with experience. And so there's no question that I can't, I will compete differently on the technological expertise side, but combine somebody with that together with the experiences that I've had, some failures, some successes, that allow somebody with my perspective to kind of have a good sense of what's coming around the corner, right? Combine those two, but do that in a transparent, cooperative kind of way. Boy, is there power in that. And that was some of the conversation that actually I had with an HR leader of a financial institution who was listening to some of this and said, you know, this is really quite interesting, because we're sort of seeing this influx of school leavers or younger people trying to blend that with the folks who have been in the organization for some time and maybe find change a little more challenging. So we need to use it as the foundation of a conversation that says you need to have both, and you need to do both. You know, you need to create an environment that's learning. That's learning driven. You need to create an environment that's inclusive. And from my perspective, good teams accomplish great things. And so, what's the composition of a good team?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot with some of the comments that came through on the previous videos is that this is a it's a big conversation that's happening right now. I'm seeing it a lot on LinkedIn, not necessarily specific to the multi-generational aspect, although I do see some of that, but just in terms of an inclusive work environment, an inclusive team approach that ultimately creates this ability to be a little bit more agile in a volatile world and all of that. And I think that what I'm noticing is the conversation is being had a lot. But I wonder, and I don't know this, and this is something that, you know, I would be interested to learn more about. I wonder how many places are actually implementing change and actually, you know, acting versus just having the conversation, putting in place policies that will ultimately kind of alter the workforce that they're hiring, that will create this inclusive environment, or are they just talking about it? Or are we just in the stages of recognizing that it's an issue and trying to sort of plan and figure it out? Because as we talked about earlier, you know, as human beings, we're great at discussing and noticing the issues and bringing them to light, but sometimes acting on it is not as easy. And so I would be interested to learn if there are places that are really putting forth an effort to act, and if so, what that looks like.
Yeah.
Something that came up for me, something that came up for me when both of you were just chatting was, I'd never thought about this, but I was thinking about the hiring process, and we hire individuals, but we measure and we perform as teams. But when we hire, we expect one individual to have all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I had never thought of that before, because, you know, how often do people get rejected for, oh, this person is great in this, this, and this, but really nobody, I mean, it's so uncommon for someone to work as just an individual, right? Even if you're an individual contributor, you're still in a team environment. And I remember, Rachel, you had mentioned this in one of our conversations, previous conversations, that's why, I mean, if one single person can do everything, why have teams at all?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I was going back to that, because in the hiring process, we tend to want a well-rounded, 100 on 100 kind of person, where in reality, you don't need that. You don't need an absolute perfect candidate. I mean, there is no such thing as that, but it just struck me when you were talking about that.
It's really interesting, because I feel like collaboration is something that's talked about so much, but yeah, the hiring process right off the bat, I mean, there's no collaborative process in that at all. There's no, I guess, you know, you fit these qualities, but we have, you know, other team members who fill in the gaps here, and so that's all fine. There is none of that, and I think of it, you know, almost like, we've had a couple of analogies for it, one being an orchestra, and now this one's popping into my brain like, you know, a puzzle. One piece of the puzzle, and then you get the rest of the team that fills in the other pieces and makes the whole picture what it ultimately should be. But yeah, I agree with you that right off the bat, there is kind of a move away from the collaboration piece just in that hiring process in itself. And then maybe an attempt to get back there once the person's been brought on.
Yeah, but if you don't think purposefully and strategically about the right pieces of the puzzle, then you're going to end up potentially with lots of, hopefully at least, lots of very smart, good people, but they may not be able to fit together in an effective manner. And you know, I won't call the projects or places out to protect the innocent, but those programs that have been most effective that I have had the privilege of being a part of are those where the teams have absolutely fit well together and have understood their respective roles and how they contribute to the roles of the other and how they protect the members of the team in terms of where one has a deficiency, others make up for it. And, you know, we referenced Amy Lynch a couple of times over the 3 webinars, and she talks about diverse teams happen to be, it's factually measured, happen to be more innovative and happen to be more effective in terms of result. They make better decisions because they're coming at things from different perspectives. But I think that to your both of your points, that maybe sometimes has happened in spite of ourselves from the point of view of how we approach the hiring process, how we evaluate the candidates. And we evaluate importantly based on individual capabilities, but sometimes less on how does this person fit? How do they complete the picture or the puzzle? And we've all worked with really smart people who are incredibly disruptive in a team environment. And so we risk that if we don't think strategically and purposefully about this. Great points.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And one thing that comes to mind, just kind of along this thread, is the importance of that collaborative leadership concept that we talked about before, where, you know, when you hire an individual for being good at one particular thing and you know that they have a really important role on the team, that there are 2 things that should be celebrated when goals are achieved. And one is that of the team achieving what they wanted to, but the other one is each individual putting forth their best effort and, you know, really being able to deliver on that one, whatever their one thing is that they're very good at. And I feel like really good team members have been lost because leaders are incapable of acknowledging that individual level in addition to, you know, the group effort and what's been achieved. But the 2 things really do have to come together. Without the individual effort, there would be no positive end result for the team. But obviously, you know, those are hand in hand. And I do think that good people can be lost when that's not something that is acknowledged.
So you mean when I sit there and listen to the leader always congratulate the same person over and over again and how important they are,
Yep.
to the exclusion of every single team member, every other team member, that's not a good thing.
Yep. Yep.
It happens
So,
a lot.
I mean,
it happens a lot.
it does. It happens all the time. And I think that it really undermines that collaborative leadership concept that, you know, we all have a responsibility for the project in our own right, and we all have a responsibility for the ultimate outcome. And if as a team we accomplish something, then that's because of every individual. It's not because of that one. It's not because of who the leader is. It's not, you know, and I think that is a really important thing to talk about.
Yeah, it is huge. It is so disruptive, and I think if to your point, if we're going to move from conversation to action, we have to really learn the skills that allow us, that help us to work in that sort of a different way. And I guess my hope is it's like inflection points, right? Everything in life is can be seen as a series of points of inflection. And generally speaking, it starts with an awareness and a conversation, and then hopefully, you know, people start to ride the wave together, right? And that's when adoption occurs. That's certainly true from a technology perspective. I want to see it true from a people perspective also, right? So that there is a willingness to to adopt some of these strategies and convert them to concrete activities.
Yeah, I wonder what it takes to get there. What it takes to get there in terms of the adoption process of, you know, actually putting these concepts into place and into play. You know, does it come down to whoever the leader is really enforcing it? Is it, you know, on the side of all of HR to get it done? I mean, I think it's the whole company in general, it's the whole team in general, but where does it start? I mean, it has to start somewhere. And I guess that's where I get stuck thinking about it, because it's a big change. It's something big to take on. But I do think that it has to be almost down on paper for it to actually be implemented properly.
Yeah, I think it has, I believe it has to start, whoever the leader is, whether the leader is more than one person or one person. I think that it starts there. I also think that it starts with a set of beliefs that are core, that become core to an organization. Because for something like this to occur successfully, you've got to believe that it's okay to fail. You don't fail on the same activity over and over again. But failure has to be accepted, celebrated for what it provides in terms of learning. I think it has to be that there is no one sharpest tool in the shed on any team, that everybody has a contribution to make. I think it has to be that you collaboratively agree to the destination, because unless you know the destination and you can visualize it and feel it, it's very difficult for people to understand how their particular contribution will allow the goal to be achieved, right? The yellow brick road cannot be properly defined if you don't know where you're trying to get to, in my opinion. So I think there are a bunch of those things. I think, you know, we talked about this notion of vulnerability in the team. I think that's an important part of it. It's okay for me to say, Rachel, I don't know that, and you do. Can you help me with this? And for you similarly to feel the same way. It's important for the team to be the preeminent thing as opposed to individuals. But our reward systems don't tend to celebrate the team, they tend to celebrate the individual performer. So I think those are some of the things to answer your maybe rhetorical question, but I think those are the things that help to make it concrete. But that's the journey, right? That's the journey. Meenu,
So,
I sense that you've been trying to jump in here, so jump in.
no, I was actually, I was started to
Question.
type something, and then I hit entered accidentally. So I'm going to hold off on that. But I see a question from Neeraj here. And the question is, what are your thoughts on creating psychological safe space for diverse employees to perform collaboratively at a high level?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this, I think, in our last one. I think that exact term was used, psychological safe space. We were talking about the fact that the concept of failure needs to be reframed to opportunity, and, you know, stop thinking of failures as failures and take them as learning experiences and be able to move forward. And I think that something that's missing
Frozen a little bit, Rachel. Something that's missing and then you froze.
Oh, something that's missing is that, you know, leadership does not often stand up and say, we we're okay with mistakes because they're opportunities for growth and for learning. Don't worry about making them, it happens, and we're going to use them as a stepping stone versus, you know, reprimanding someone for making them. I referenced in one of the videos a podcast I was listening to where someone in a leadership position at Google X was saying that he actually in corporate meetings, he acknowledges teams who have recently had somewhat of a failure, aka opportunity, because if they did not accomplish what they set out to, then that means that they are doing something that hasn't been done before, something new, and that means that innovation is happening. And so I think that what it comes down to really is not only someone saying it's okay to make mistakes and learn and grow from them, but also setting that example. I've seen a lot of business case studies that talk about successes. Maybe there should be business case studies that talk about these things that went a different way and how it can be an opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing is that there has to be an acknowledgement and awareness of the differences, right? I remember working with building a team in the south of India, and an individual on that team who, whenever we got on a call, was very, very quiet and reserved and almost afraid to make that contribution. I had the opportunity to visit that office in person, and I realized that this was one of the smartest people that I had ever met and worked with. And so I took it as a personal challenge to figure out how I was going to find ways to recognize them in ways that were important to that individual. As she came out of that shell, because she started to connect the dots in terms of the importance of the work that she was doing and the success and all of those things, it was really so nice to see. I don't know that I don't know that there's one specific answer. I think there's a series of things, but I do think that the members of the teams who are in positions of leadership have to find ways to be more aware of their surroundings, aware of their situations, be more engaged in those things that allow people to see their own vulnerabilities. Because then when somebody sees that, they tend to develop a level of empathy, and the discussion, the relationship changes a lot. So I don't know that, I think it's a wonderful question. I don't know that there's one specific answer, but it's a series of things. And those are, you know, a couple of examples of things that I did or I've seen.
What I'm hearing is, you know, one is leadership, setting the example. Setting the example from the top. And then the other thing is, what I also heard was being present and engaged and empathetic. And something that I kind of inferred from what both of you shared was also, you know, having an open mind around and not being fixed or fixated about a certain way of working. Mm-hmm. That what works for one may not work for another. And people have different learning styles. People have different ways in which they engage. There's, you know, you have folks that are introverts versus extroverts. In that particular example, David, that you talked about, that's what came up for me. So those are the things I'm hearing. One is, again, leadership by example, lead by example, leadership from the top, doing the right thing, and being present and engaged and accepting of different ways of working. So those are three things that I heard. Neeraj,
You hear this comment all the time that culture, that culture has strategy for lunch every single day, or whatever the right terminology is, right?
Yeah.
And it is so important. You can have the best strategy in the world, the best vision for the organization in the world, but if you don't marry that or align that to culture, which is a little less tangible, but is so important in terms of how you behave every single day. One thing's for sure, as a leader, I've had the opportunity to be in that role for that kind of a role for a number of years. You don't realize how much people look at you and look to you, right? How much people sense how you're feeling about a particular issue and initiative and effort. And that has much more import in terms of how that individual or those individuals are going to behave than what you say. It's kind of what you do. And I think it's part of it.
Yeah, and culture is really what gets tolerated. That becomes culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that also emerged for me from what you were sharing earlier, both of you were sharing earlier, is that looking at age or generation that you come from under the overarching umbrella of inclusion as a way of operation, right? That's another thing that kind of emerged. So because some of the things that you were talking about, it applies to any of the intersections in our identity, right? It applies to race, it applies to ethnicity. And in coaching, and I'm sure Neeraj will resonate with this, is, we talk about unconditional positive regard. And that applies regardless of what your base identities are, right? And that's the other thing that emerged for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting time and made more interesting by what we've experienced in 2020, right? So we've kind of, some of this conversation we were having was in the midst of all of this, and we're not at the end of it yet, but hopefully soon. But a lot of it suggests that, this whole notion of agility, I mean, we talk about that in a business context, but boy, do we need it, not just in a business context, but in a personal, on a very personal level. And so I think that part of this is supporting this notion that for organizations to be successful, they have to be agile. For teams to be agile, they need to be collaborative. And I think that's all part and parcel of this of this direction, and the whole notion of how do you engage and how do you demonstrate empathy, which builds trust, because people will go through walls for you if they trust you and they know that you have their back. They will go through a wall for you. So anyway.
I would agree with that statement. I think that trust is one of the most important foundational things that any team needs to have in order to be successful. We talked in one of the videos about the fact that you need to know that everyone on your team is going to deliver on whatever their individual piece of the project is. And that's something that's become even more real in 2020 with remote work. And I saw an article about it on LinkedIn the other day, and someone commenting saying 2020 taught us that most places can trust their employees to get the work done when people aren't looking. And I mean, that's an impressive thing. If that statement is true, and most employers are feeling that way right now, that they can trust their employees to get the work done, then I think that that's absolutely huge. I think that that's a really great stepping stone and really a really good thing that's come out of 2020, a year that has otherwise been obviously very challenging for everyone.
Yeah, and I agree. You got to look for those positive nuggets, and to me, that's certainly one of them. And it's, you know, it's, I sort of chuckle when I see the commercial with the young woman with her I don't know, 4 or 5 year old who wants to be in the video and is doing everything he possibly can to be in that video, and she's doing everything she possibly can with this very large coffee mug to shelter his face from video. But that's kind of how life has emerged, right? And does that mean that you can't be effective in doing your work? I don't think so. I think it means that you are doing an awfully good job of balancing the priorities in your life. So
yeah,
those are the good things that have come out of this terrible year.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the notion came from that, you know, your personal life has to be this entirely separate thing. That's just not reality. I mean, how do you expect people to function compartmentalizing their whole life into boxes? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. So that's what that story brings up to me. I mean, that's obviously someone who they've got a whole life going on, and if they're delivering at work with all of that on top of it, then kudos. I mean, why would you ever criticize someone for having something outside of work? We can do multiple things.
I think that's the benefit of 20, but that's also the benefit of people realizing that, maybe as a consequence of 20, I don't know, that that one has to be more accepting, one has to be, because there, but for the grace of whatever or whomever go I, right? I could be on that same call and it's not a 5-year-old anymore, but it's something else that jumps into the middle of it, and I'm trying to balance these two things. But am I at the end of the day effectively executing? And I think that's the key.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a great conversational journey. You know, we're thinking about, so what do we do with this next? And so if for those of you who are maybe on this call and hearing us for the first time or hearing us live for the first time, have any suggestions in that regard, we'd also love to hear those, because I think this is at the core of how we become better, stronger, all of those important activities.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think one of the things that I would take away from just having the conversation today, and we already knew it before, but it goes so far beyond multi-generational inclusion. It's gender inclusion, it's cultural inclusion, it's all of the different things across the board that, you know, make us human beings and that need to be counted and need to be considered when it comes to our professional life.
Absolutely.
And I apologize for the movement on my end. It's 2020 and I was having technology failures happening. So I was trying to steady the camera while fixing things.
That's okay. We were empathetic.
And you know, it goes to show that, and this is something we talked about in one of our episodes, that it's no longer about balancing work and life. It's really work-life integration. And again, how different generations approach it very differently. And you know, something that I was trying to type earlier and hit the too quickly was that the patterns I'm seeing in terms of a multi-generational team, that perspective is the parameters, not patterns, the parameters that I'm seeing where potential for differences and perhaps conflict are perspectives on leadership, what leadership looks like, Some of the older school of thought is more command and control, and now it's moving to collaborative. Then perspectives on teamwork. We are moving towards self-organized, self-managing teams, whereas earlier it used to be more about waiting for direction, which also is a byproduct of the kind of leadership style. And the third thing that popped up for me was familiarity with technology. So those were the three kind of main points that popped up for me in terms of if you were to look at, key differences between different generations.
Yeah, I think those are three good summary points as takeaways. It does require a shift in how we approach stuff, right? And by the way, position in generation doesn't necessarily dictate people's willingness to make change. I've actually worked with people a lot younger than me who are much more rigid in their approach, and much more we need to do it this way because X, and a lot of that because is as a consequence or is because of the fear of letting go to someone else who may actually know the stuff better than you do, and so that whole notion of collaboration becomes really, really critical. It's been a fun conversation.
It has been good. Thank you. Thank you both. And thanks everyone for participating.
Yes, absolutely. Looks like.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
just adding in, it's been an interesting conversation, and this is the first time that I'm hearing both of you. Would love to go back and see some of the videos. But one thing to add to what Meenakshi was saying in terms of different perspectives from multi-generational angle, the other one that comes to my mind is the entire notion of career growth, right? How you view that. It will be so nice to have people with different kinds of experiences around that, because otherwise the current generation is always looking for what's the next growth opportunity that I have, how can I move up to the next level. But it would be good to give them a perspective of in terms of focusing more on contribution, teamwork, collaboration, and eventually what the function is achieving, rather than just individual ambition, right?
Yeah, it's a wonderful point, because that is sort of the traditional thinking, right? So what's next in the ladder, and how do I get from this rung to that rung? And if I don't, is that a reflection of my performance or not? And I think there's so much more involved, and I'm certainly hearing more people say, I like doing this. I feel like I can make a contribution here. I don't necessarily want a leadership role. And interestingly, one of the things that I've struggled with as a leader is the notion that sometimes you have to take your best people and promote them in order to show them that recognition or reward, and you may actually promote them into positions that they're not well suited for, because they're not naturally good at running a team, but they're very good at being an individual contributor. And so I think it starts the conversation about is this going to evolve from an HR practice and policy perspective? How do we enshrine some of these things into that culture that we're looking for, that says it's okay to stay in this type of role if that's what you like and what you're good at, and here's instead how we're going to reward your contribution. It's not necessarily this progression of titles or careers. And that's going to be particularly challenging in certain environments, because I know in other parts of the globe that's one of the measures that is always a struggle, right? If I'm a senior, how do I get to be a senior, or whatever that is? So it's a really good point.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it all comes down to sort of similar to what we talked about before. It's just that we do tend to have a very individualistic mindset as human beings in this world right now versus the collaborative mindset. And it's really it's a balance of the two things, because obviously, yes, you need to reward individuals, keep them motivated, all of that kind of stuff. But maybe it's a restructuring of that system so that part of the reward is seeing the great things that the team is accomplishing, you know, and just reframing the way that we think about that as human beings.
Yeah, it's a wonderful point, Niraj.
Yes, I agree. And I just put that in the chat as well, Neeraj. So this was one of the things we kind of touched upon in our first episode, where we talked about what do different generations look for in their careers and in their job search process, and what does success look like for each one. So I'm glad you kind of brought that up as well.
Thanks. I'll look that up. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right. So if there aren't any more questions, I really wanted to ask both of you, David and Rachel, for your final thoughts on the topic.
Okay, Rachel, you
As in
go first.
for now. Yes.
Oh, shift it over to me.
Yeah. This is called delegation in the old days.
Yeah. This is called throwing someone under the bus.
Yeah.
No, it's my final thoughts on it are that this is a conversation that's just starting, and I think that it has a lot more growth that needs to happen, and the conversation needs to be brought to the table in every possible setting that it can be. But at the end of the day, the key takeaway really is that you are never putting yourself at a disadvantage by making decisions that emphasize a diverse team, diverse in all different ways. Ultimately, those perspectives really do bring a lot to the table, and they make for a much richer experience and a lot more success along the way. And I think, honestly, they just make us better people. We have a lot to learn from one another, and the sooner that we accept that, the better.
Yeah, well said. So my final thoughts. I remember being. I remember the reaction of teams and team members 20 years ago, and the reaction of teams and team members today. And people are not that different. Whether that's culturally or ethnically or generationally, people are not that different. They thrive and they grow on the basis of very similar things. They want to be engaged. They want to see a purpose for the day-to-day work that they do. They want to be recognized. And I'll say the first one again in a different way. They want to be contributing positively as part of a team, so engaged. And that ain't that different from my experience 20 years ago versus today. And I think sometimes we can get so caught up in the very pure business objectives of a financial target or a satisfaction target of some sort that we actually forget that by focusing on the people and the team and the right activity, that we'll end up with the right result. And so I'm hoping that it is the beginning of a conversation that's going to last, and that when we get past 2020 and life begins to return to some sense of what was normal, although I'm not sure what that is going to be, that we won't forget these important lessons, and we won't neglect the opportunity to focus on, I think, the 2 or 3 or 4 key elements of this, because at the end of the day, people do all want the same thing. And what a wonderful world environment it will be when we can promote and encourage and be a part of those things. There's so much to learn from each other, so much to learn. And I hope we don't miss the opportunity that's been presented for us, because everything happens for a reason. And 2020 happened for a reason. Not sure what it was or is, but maybe it's teaching us to think about some of these things a little more carefully, purposefully. So those are my closing thoughts.
And I did want to wrap this up by pointing out something that, Rachel, you mentioned in one of our episodes, that David, you and I doing this together it's in itself a testament to this whole topic of multi-generational teams. We 3 represent 3 different generations among ourselves. And we did all of this completely virtually, this whole program, if you will, starting from September. And our approach has also been very different to how we, how we started with the amount of preparation that each of us put in and all of that. And all the way up to how we engaged with the topic, how we, the kind of thoughts that we had and what we brought to the table. And what I'm walking away with is, I think one thing that really stays with me is becoming aware of my own unconscious biases and becoming aware of preconceived notions that I have, not only about my own generation, but about others as well at the workplace and in otherwise. And something I want to leave everyone with is, this is something I read and someone said in another talk that I was listening to, is to question your own thoughts. Don't trust your own thoughts every time, to question your own thoughts. And I think that that is a great approach to keeping an open mind, not just about the multi-generational perspective, but also in across all of these differences. So this has been a fantastic journey with the 2 of you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this, and really looking at the future of work from a multi-generational perspective. It's just been fantastic. And we really hope to continue these conversations and keep the dialogue alive as we step into 2021, especially because I think this whole VUCA thing, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity is more real than ever in 2021 as we step in. So I really hope that we are able to keep these conversations alive. So with that, thank you, everyone. Wish you a peaceful holiday season and a fruitful and successful 2021. Thanks, everyone.